In the quiet town of Eldritch, where old tales and whispers of the past still lingered like fog over the fields, there lived three cousins, Emmy, David, and Sergiu. They were as close as brothers, each with his own quirks and fears, bound together by their love for the thrill of the unknown. On a crisp autumn evening, the trio, along with their friends, two boys, Dennis and Alex, and two girls, Mata and Elisa, decided to gather around the flickering light of a backyard fire pit. The air was filled with the scent of burning wood, and the sky above was a canvas of dark blue, pierced by the occasional twinkle of a distant star. As the flames danced and crackled, the group began to exchange horror stories, each tale more chilling than the last. Their voices, filled with a mixture of fear and excitement, echoed into the night, creating a symphony of eerie whispers that blended with the rustling leaves around them. Sergiu, the oldest and often the bravest, recounted tales of haunted forests and ghostly apparitions that supposedly roamed the nearby woods. His stories were met with wide eyes and occasional shivers from his cousins and friends. Emmy, ever the skeptic, laughed off the tales, proclaiming them nothing more than figments of overactive imaginations. As the clock struck midnight, Emmy, feeling bold and slightly spurred on by the adrenaline pumping through his veins, proposed a dare. "Let's go to the forest," he said, his eyes glinting with a mix of challenge and curiosity. "Let's see for ourselves that there are no monsters or ghosts." After a moment of hesitant silence, the group agreed, driven by a concoction of fear and the exhilarating rush of potentially facing the unknown. They grabbed their flashlights, their beams of light slicing through the darkness as they set off towards the looming shadows of the forest. The journey to the woods was filled with playful banter and nervous laughter. Yet, as they delved deeper into the forest, a heavy silence fell over them, punctuated only by the crunching of leaves underfoot and the distant call of nocturnal creatures. Suddenly, a series of bizarre sounds pierced the night. They were unlike any animal cry the group had heard before. A chilling, almost mechanical screech that seemed to echo from the depths of the forest itself. Sergiu tried to dismiss it, his voice slightly less steady than before. "It's just animals," he murmured, but his eyes darted nervously around the darkened woods. As they continued, Mata and Elisa drifted slightly away from the others, drawn to a peculiar, soft, glowing light emanating from a thicket nearby. Their curiosity got the better of them, leaving them momentarily separated from the group. Then, a scream shattered the night. It was Dennis. The group spun around, their flashlights frantically sweeping through the trees until they found him. Dennis was suspended in midair, his body unnaturally still, pinned against a large oak as if held by unseen forces. Panic erupted among the cousins and their friends. In the chaos, they stumbled upon a dark, gaping hole in the ground hidden beneath a cluster of dense bushes. One by one, they were pulled towards it, as if by a magnetic force, their screams blending with the sinister sounds of the forest. Inside this dark void, they encountered beings of a nightmarish nature. Ghostly figures, grotesque creatures, and something that defied all known laws of nature, referred to in whispers as SCP-99. The air was thick with despair, and the shadows seemed to pulse with malevolent life. Trapped and terrified, the group faced horrors that seemed to stretch the very fabric of reality. It was in this moment of utter darkness that Emmy, David, and Sergiu found themselves clinging to their faith more than ever. They joined hands and, in a moment of divine inspiration, recited a prayer they had learned in their childhood. The words of the prayer, spoken with fervent hope, filled the space around them, vibrating through the air like a powerful sonic wave. Miraculously, the dark entities began to dissolve, as if their very existence was being erased by the purity of the prayer. With the breaking of dawn, the forest was silent once more. Emmy, David, and Sergiu found themselves back at the edge of the woods, the sun casting long shadows on the ground. The world seemed to stand still as Emmy, David, and Sergiu staggered out of the forest. The early morning light did little to warm their chilled bones or calm their shattered nerves. Each step they took was haunted by the memory of the night's horrors, echoes of screams that seemed to linger in the air around them. As they made their way back to the town, the silence between them was heavy, laden with unasked questions and unspeakable fears. What had happened to their friends? Were they still alive, trapped in that nightmarish realm? Or had they been claimed by the dark forces they had encountered? The town of Eldritch appeared before them, its familiar streets now seeming alien and menacing. The quaint houses, once symbols of warmth and safety, now cast long, ominous shadows that seemed to whisper secrets in the light of the rising sun. Upon reaching their homes, the trio parted ways without a word, each retreating into his own shell of shock and disbelief. The comfort of their beds did little to ease their minds, as the horrors they had witnessed clawed at the edges of their sanity. In the following days, Emmy, David, and Sergiu tried to return to their normal lives, but the shadows of that night were inescapable. Sleep brought no relief, as their dreams were plagued by vivid nightmares of the forest and its ghastly inhabitants. Driven by a desperate need for answers, they decided to meet again under the guise of night. The backyard, where they had once shared tales and laughter, now felt like a stage set for a tragedy. The fire pit was cold and unlit, a stark reminder of their last moments of innocence. "I've been hearing things," Sergiu confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Whispers at night, scratches on the windows. It's like they followed us back." David nodded, his eyes hollow. "I see shadows moving at the corners of my vision, and sometimes I swear I can hear Mata calling my name." Emmy, looking between his cousins, felt a chill run down his spine. He had hoped he was alone in his experiences, that perhaps it was all just a product of his traumatized mind. But the realization that they were all suffering the same torment was both a relief and a horror. Determined to find closure, and perhaps to rescue their friends, they devised a plan. They would return to the forest, armed with more than just flashlights this time. Emmy suggested they bring symbols of their faith, crosses and holy water, hoping it would protect them from the darkness. That night, as they ventured back into the forest, the atmosphere was charged with a malevolent energy. The trees seemed to lean in closer, their branches twisting in the wind like the fingers of a hungry creature. As they neared the spot where they had last seen their friends, the air grew colder, and a thick fog rolled in, enveloping them in a suffocating embrace. The darkness was absolute, pierced only by the weak beams of their flashlights. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a low growl that seemed to come from all directions. Shadows moved just beyond the light's reach, quick and fluid, circling the cousins like predators stalking their prey. Then, from the fog, figures began to emerge, twisted humanoid shapes, their features blurred and shifting. The air was filled with the stench of decay, and the ground beneath their feet seemed to pulse with a sinister life. Frozen with fear, Emmy, David, and Sergiu clutched their makeshift weapons, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The figures drew closer, their movements erratic, as if they were being controlled by some unseen force. The cousins were surrounded, with no escape in sight. Just as they prepared to face their end, a piercing scream cut through the night, louder and more terrifying than any human voice could muster. It was a call to the depths, a summoning of something even more horrifying. And in that moment, the earth beneath them began to tremble, as if answering the call. The trembling earth beneath Emmy, David, and Sergiu became a violent quake, shaking the very foundations of the forest as if the ground itself was ready to swallow them whole. The air thickened with a palpable dread, and the darkness seemed to deepen, absorbing all light around them. Above the roar of the shaking earth, a new sound emerged, a deep, rumbling growl that resonated through the bones of the trio. It was as if the forest itself had found a voice, an ancient and malevolent whisper from the depths of the earth. The figures surrounding them, twisted shadows of once human forms, began to contort and stretch, their limbs elongating and faces splitting into grotesque, tooth-filled grins. The air around these beings shimmered with a dark energy, and their eyes, if they could be called eyes, glowed with a sickly light. Emmy, clutching a cross tightly in his trembling hand, stepped forward. His voice, though quivering, held a firm resolve as he began to recite a prayer, the words cutting sharply through the chaos of the night. David and Sergiu joined in, their combined voices forming a shield of faith against the encroaching darkness. But the creatures were relentless. As the cousins continued their prayers, one of the shadow beings lunged forward, its form blurring into a swift, dark streak. Sergiu barely managed to sidestep, feeling the icy touch graze his arm, leaving a trail of numbing cold that seeped deep into his flesh. The ground split open with a deafening crack near the center of the clearing, revealing a gaping maw that seemed to lead directly into an abyss. From this chasm, a new horror began to emerge, a colossal entity, its body covered in shifting scales that glistened with a wet, otherworldly sheen. The creature's multiple eyes flickered open, burning with a hellish light, and its many mouths opened, each lined with rows of sharp, jagged teeth. The cousins recoiled in terror, realizing that what they faced now was far beyond any ghost or phantom. They had awakened something ancient and terrible, something that had been slumbering beneath the earth, waiting for a call to rise. As the monstrous entity pulled itself further from the pit, the forest seemed to warp around it, trees bending away in fear, their branches trembling. The shadow beings, previously menacing, now appeared almost reverent, bowing as the creature ascended from the depths. Emmy, despite the overwhelming fear, felt a surge of desperate anger. "We have to close it!" he shouted over the roar of the emerging beast. The trio, fortified by a sudden rush of adrenaline, began to focus their prayers on the chasm, hoping to force it shut. The entity, sensing their intent, let out a bellowing roar that shook the leaves from the trees and sent a shockwave of force that knocked the cousins to the ground. Fighting against the overwhelming power, they struggled to their knees, continuing their chants with every bit of strength they had left. Around them, the shadow beings wailed and hissed, a cacophony of nightmares that tried to drown out the sound of their prayers. But amidst the chaos, a clear, pure note cut through, the sound of a church bell, distant yet distinct. In the weeks that followed their harrowing encounter in the forest, Emmy, David, and Sergiu found themselves ensnared in a web of lingering terror. The town of Eldritch, once a haven of familiarity and peace, now seemed to harbor shadows in every corner, watching and waiting. The three cousins, forever marked by the events, felt an icy grip on their reality that they could not shake off. The townspeople began to notice changes too. Pets disappeared without a trace, and wild animals were found inexplicably mutilated in the woods, their bodies arranged in grotesque, ritualistic patterns. Whispered rumors started to circulate, speaking of cursed grounds and ghostly figures seen wandering near the edge of the forest at night. Emmy, haunted by vivid nightmares where the chasm reopened to unleash its horrors anew, decided that they needed to understand more about what they had encountered. The trio scoured old library archives, speaking in hushed tones as they pored over dusty books and faded maps. They discovered tales of ancient rites and dark deities worshipped by forgotten civilizations that once dwelled in the area, entities that demanded fear and fed on despair. One evening, as a thunderstorm raged outside, providing a fittingly grim backdrop, the cousins stumbled upon a particularly old tome, bound in weathered leather and locked with a corroded clasp. Inside, they found references to a deity named Mordath, the harbinger of echoes, a being of immense power that thrived in the depths of the earth, controlling its minions from shadows. As they delved deeper into the lore, the wind howled around the house and the lights flickered ominously as if protesting the secrets being unearthed. Sergiu, feeling a chill crawl up his spine, suggested they stop, fearing they were drawing unwanted attention. But Emmy, driven by a desperate need for answers, insisted they continue. That night, as the storm reached its peak, A blackout plunged the forest, shrouded in a perpetual gloom that even the midday sun struggled to penetrate, seemed to close in around Emmy, David, and Sergiu as they ventured deeper into its heart. The air was thick with an unspoken dread, the silence punctuated only by the distant cawing of a crow or the rustle of leaves underfoot, a stark contrast to the usual symphony of woodland sounds. Armed with a map sketched hastily from the descriptions in the ancient tome, they made their way toward what they believed to be the focal point of the cult's activities. Every so often, they would find unsettling signs, small altars made of stacked stones, remnants of burnt offerings, and symbols etched into the bark of trees, pulsing faintly with an eerie phosphorescent glow. The deeper they went, the more palpable the sense of foreboding became. The trees here were older, their branches twisted into gnarled shapes, casting grotesque shadows that seemed to writhe and twitch as if alive. The ground was softer too, moist and giving underfoot, marked by footprints that were disturbingly human, yet oddly elongated. Suddenly David froze, his hand shooting out to stop his cousins. Ahead, partially hidden by a thick mist that seemed unnatural in its density, were figures. Hooded, cloaked, they moved rhythmically, their motions synchronized in a silent, sinister dance around a large, ancient stone that pulsed with that same eerie glow they had seen on the trees. The cousins crouched behind a large, fallen log, watching as the figures chanted in a language that twisted the air, making the skin crawl and the mind recoil. As they chanted, the ground around the stone seemed to liquefy, swirling with dark colors that defied the natural palette of the earth. Emmy, clutching a makeshift cross, whispered, "We need to stop this now." But before they could act, the ceremony reached a crescendo. The air itself appeared to shudder, and from the midst of the stone emerged a form, shadowy, shifting, immense. It was Mordath, or a herald of it, a visage so terrifying that it threatened to strip their minds of sanity. The creature's eyes, if they could be called eyes, burned a deep blood red, and its many mouths opened to reveal rows of sharp, jagged teeth. In that moment, a terrible understanding dawned upon the cousins. The cult had not been trying to summon Mordath into the world. They had been trying to anchor it here, to make the earth itself a conduit for its malice and power. David, overcoming the paralysis of fear, began chanting a counter-rite from the tome, his voice steady but filled with terror. Sergiu and Emmy joined in, their voices weaving together a tapestry of sacred words, each syllable a defiant stand against the darkness. The creature roared, a sound that fractured the air and made the trees bend as if in agony. The cultists turned, finally aware of their presence, and began to advance toward them with unholy speed. It was a battle of wills and words. As the cousins chanted, the ground began to solidify, the swirling darkness dissipating with each verse recited. The creature struggled against the binding, its forms flickering between the ethereal and the grotesquely tangible. With a final, collective shout, the cousins completed the rite. A burst of blinding light enveloped the clearing, and the shockwave knocked everyone to the ground. When the light faded, the stone was silent, inert. The cultists, those that remained, were scattered, stumbling away into the darkness, their connection to Mordath severed. Breathing heavily, the cousins looked around. The forest felt lighter somehow, as if a great weight had been lifted from its shoulders. They had won, at least for now. But the victory was not without its scars. They knew that Mordath was still out there in the depths of the earth, waiting for its next opportunity to breach the surface. As they made their way back to the town, the realization settled in. Their fight against the darkness was far from over. They had glimpsed the depths of ancient malice, and it had glimpsed them in return. They were marked now, warriors in a shadowy battle that was older than time itself, and the darkness would not forget them. After their harrowing confrontation in the forest, Emmy, David, and Sergiu returned to Eldritch, carrying with them the weight of their experience. The town seemed different now, its streets shadowed not just by the setting sun, but by the lingering presence of the unseen. The townspeople, unaware of the darkness that had almost taken root among them, continued their lives. But the cousins knew that the veil between their world and the darkness had been irreversibly thinned. The aftermath of the ritual left them exhausted yet vigilant, aware that the battle they had fought was merely a skirmish in a war that spanned the depths of history. They spent the following days fortifying their knowledge, revisiting the old tome, and researching more about the ancient entities that lurked just beyond human perception. As days turned into weeks, strange occurrences in Eldritch began to subside. Pets returned home, wild animals ceased to be found in bizarre ritualistic displays, and the eerie mist that had once rolled in from the woods receded, retreating back into the shadows from which it came. Yet the peace was superficial. Each cousin felt the constant nagging pull of the darkness, a reminder that their lives would never return to normal. Nightmares plagued them, each dream a vivid journey back into the forest, or a vision of what lurked beneath. They woke nightly in cold sweats, the echoes of the creature's roars still ringing in their ears. Determined to prevent any further influence of Mordath, they formed a pact, a commitment to guard Eldritch against the shadows. They set up nightly watches, rotating responsibilities to monitor any unusual activities or signs of the cult's resurgence. Their homes became filled with symbols of protection, salt lines on windowsills, crosses hung above doorways, and circles of iron nails buried at the thresholds. One evening, as autumn bled into winter and the chill in the air became a biting cold, Sergiu made a chilling discovery. While reviewing old land deeds and maps of Eldritch, he found an anomaly. A plot of land on the outskirts of town, never developed, that aligned perfectly with the focal points of ancient rituals detailed in the tome. It was an epicenter of sorts, a ley line node of dark energy. The cousins decided it was time to confront the core of the darkness. Armed with their newfound knowledge and tools of faith, they ventured to the plot under the cover of a moonless night. The ground was frozen, the air sharp with the scent of impending snow. As they approached the center of the plot, the familiar sense of foreboding filled the air, the ground beneath them humming with a sinister energy. They began a ritual of sealing, each word and symbol designed to bind and barricade the darkness below. Midway through the ritual, the earth trembled softly, a low moan rising from the ground, as if the land itself was protesting their actions. Shadows flickered at the edges of their vision, coalescing into forms too quick to catch. The cold grew intense, biting at their skin, trying to drive them back. But they pressed on, their voices growing louder and more confident with each chant. Finally, with a resounding crack, the air cleared, the humming ceased, and the ground stilled. They had sealed the node, at least for now. As they left the plot, a sense of somber accomplishment among them, the first snow of the season began to fall, each flake a silent benediction. They knew this was not the end. Mordath and its minions would not cease their attempts to enter the world, but for now, Eldritch was safe. Returning to town, the cousins felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had seen the darkness face to face and had prevailed. But more importantly, they had strengthened the bonds between them, forged in the fires of shared trials and tribulations. They were no longer just family. They were guardians, watchers on the threshold between light and darkness. As they walked through the quiet streets of Eldritch, snow blanketing the world in white, they accepted that their lives had changed forever. They were part